On today's show, Klay Thompson has the most to prove on the Dallas Mavericks next season. I'll tell you what it is and how he's going to prove it on today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
You are Locked On Mavs.
Great, Rusty.
Your daily Dallas Mavericks podcast.
No one's dying.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Amazing.
Your team every day.
Still can't even open.
And welcome. You're locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager at the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Thanks for being part of the show, making Locked On Mavs your first listen today. Best way you can help us grow the show is to listen every day on any podcast platform. Take us with you. Leave a 5-star review, like the video on YouTube, and comment anything below. Let me know who has the most to prove on the Mavs next season. Let me know on YouTube, Spotify, Twitter, wherever you want to comment there. Instagram as well, at Locked On Mavs. Follow us there. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And joining me for the first time on the show, Mavs beat reporter for Clutch Points, also covers the Wings. What you got for me, Joey Mistretta?
Yeah, well, the Wings playing good basketball. They were just defeated by the Fever, as you know, but they'd won 3 games in a row, so they're looking good. As far as the Mavs are concerned, we got training camp coming up here in a month. Very excited for that. And for me personally, just looking forward to my second season of Mavs coverage. It's going to be awesome.
It was a good time for you to jump in for the first year last year. You jumped in right in the final season, which is kind of amazing. Better than the year I started, which was, I think it was like the first year they got Harrison Barnes. Great. I mean, cool. That was one of the down points of Mavs of the Mavs last like couple decades. Today, we're going to get into who has the most to prove on the Dallas Mavericks. We'll talk about a couple players that we have. I had Joey pick a couple players. I picked a couple players who we think have a lot to prove on the Dallas Mavericks and how they can prove it. Because I think that the couple players that I picked, I think they can prove some of these things. We're going to do, I picked Maxi Kleber. We'll talk about Jaden Hardy. What's the long-term play for him for the Mavericks and what should it be for the Mavs? We'll talk about Daniel Gafford too and what he has to prove. But I want to start here, Joey. Let's start with Klay Thompson because Klay Thompson is going to have a lot to prove for the Dallas Mavericks. He's new coming in. And so usually with a player that's new coming in, you have to prove some of the things. You have to prove that, all right, what we bought and what we expect is what we're going to get from this guy. We hope that, the Mavericks will hope that he shoots the ball well enough, hope that he defends well enough and all that. And I think that what he has to prove specifically is that defensive portion of it. Can he still defend for 28 minutes? That's about what he averaged last season. I think he'll get about that, maybe a little less than that for the Mavericks, but can he defend at a high enough level for the Mavericks to be a top 6, 7, 8 defense in the NBA? And can he do it for 28 minutes? I think that's the main thing. Is there something else that you think Klay has to prove, or is it just the defensive end and defending at that level for the time he's on the floor?
Well, defense for sure. I mean, injuries have been, just horrible for him, but I think it's funny because last year, people say Klay had a horrible season, and he actually played pretty well. Like for most people in the NBA standards. Obviously, he went 0 for 10 that last game. Every Instagram comment was 0 for 10. It was ridiculous. But I do think that Klay has something to prove. I agree with you, especially on the defensive end of the floor. But at the very least, 3-point shooting wise, you're going to get 37, 38% at like the floor. He could probably shoot 40 to 42% with Kyrie and Luka dishing him the ball. So offensively, I'm excited. But yeah, I agree. Defensively, I think that's the primary thing he has to prove.
This has been sort of the thing we've talked about is, the downgrade from Derrick Jones Jr. And yesterday on the show, I talked about how Najee Marshall, I think, is the direct replacement and the upgrade for Derrick Jones Jr. I think him coming in is just going to be a better version of what the Mavs got with Derrick Jones Jr. But I got a lot of comments that were saying, well, you can't say that Najee Marshall is the replacement for Derrick Jones Jr. because he's not starting. Klay Thompson is coming in and being the starter. And that's completely right. And that's the thing that is going to be a little different is that the Mavs now have this guy in Klay Thompson starting instead of Derrick Jones Jr. And maybe Najee replaces the role, but in just that starting lineup, in that 5-man unit, how does he replace that defense? And so I fired up Synergy. I started to look at some of the numbers, and Klay didn't have a bad defensive year last year. And this is what the Lockdown Warriors people, Chuck Walter and Kylan Mills told me, is that Klay was still solid last year defensively. On Synergy, they do this rating from poor to excellent. And on spot-up shots, defending spot-up shots, he rated very good. defending pick and roll ball handlers. He defended very good. That's the second highest like rating you could get. On handoffs, he defended good. Post-ups, he defended very good. Isolations, he was excellent. There was only 56 possessions, but still, he was excellent in that. I mean, the only things that he was below average on were the defending a roll man, which you'd expect, a wing, and then off of a screen, which was only 6% of his possessions. So it wasn't like Klay Thompson even had this awful, terrible defensive year last year. Now, yes, he's coming into this, coming to the Mavericks and maybe expected to defend a little bit better, playing next to a Luka and a Kyrie, but he also played next to a Chris Paul and a Steph Curry, and those guys aren't defending at the highest level right now either. And the Warriors still found a way to have a good defense. So to me, I think he can prove that just by coming in and playing the defense he played last year.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about that, and I was looking at the NBA 2K ratings, and look, 2K doesn't mean anything, ratings, whatever. But 2K actually
research though.
Yeah, but 2K actually gave him an 80 overall on defense, which I was surprised by. I thought they were going to go, 70s, maybe even 60s. Like, you never know with that narrative. They gave him an 80. So shout out to 2K. Klay still is a respectable defender. He's not the defender he once was, and we'll see if he can get back to that. But he might be all right.
If he is an 80, let's say like in IRL, in real life, he's an 80 on defense. Is that good enough for the Mavericks just to have an 80 in that spot?
I think so. I mean, you look at that offense. Luka and Kyrie are elite, obviously. Klay is going to shoot. You got the big men down low. You got PJ. Like, I think offensively they can do enough where the defense with Najee and Quentin, like, you might be all right. So if he's an 80, yeah, I think that could be okay.
I kind of think so too, because I think one of the things is I mentioned, can he defend for 28 minutes? That's sort of one of the things I think he has to prove. I went back last year and looked through his games. He played 39 games at 20 to 29 minutes, and he played 34 games at 30 to 39 minutes. So I think he'll play more games from the 20 to 29 minute mark, amount of time, instead of the 30 to 39. I think he'll even play less minutes this season. And so it's not, can Klay Thompson defend at an elite level for the whole game or for a big amount of minutes? He's not going to be put in that kind of a situation with the Mavericks. You go back to what Jason Kidd said about Klay Thompson earlier last week. We just want him to be him. Just be himself. I think they're going to put him in the right box. I think they'll put him in the right mold, and they won't try to make him do too much. They don't really need him to do too much. You have Najee Marshall, like I mentioned yesterday, as the replacement. You have Quentin Grimes that can come in and play some of that time. You have Dinwiddie who can come in and play in the offensive role. And so it's not like they're going to stretch him too thin where all of a sudden this one defensive problem is going to be exasperated even more so to the point where, okay, now it's such a big issue for the Mavericks. I think he'll play less minutes, and I think that this issue will be lessened on the fact that I think the offensive upgrade is going to make up for the downgrade, if any.
Oh, completely. Yeah, like you're going all in on offense. That's what it seems like. Defense is going to be good enough. As long as it's not a horrible defense, I don't think it will be. The offense is going to carry the rest. And you look at today's NBA, like everyone says defense wins championships, which is true. But you need good offense. And the Mavs have that. If the defense can just hold up its end of the bargain, they're going to be okay.
And their offense wasn't good enough last year, right? Like that's right. The thing that they really struggled with towards the end of the playoffs is they just didn't have enough scorers at that point. And you need more of an elite offense. So hopefully Klay brings that on that side, makes up for the lack of defense that he'll bring, even if it is any kind of downgrade. If it, any sort of downgrade, the offense I think will make up for it. And so to me, for Klay Thompson, he has to prove that he can defend for 28 minutes, defend at a high enough level for the Mavericks to get to top 6, top 7, top 8. And then I think how he proves it is he's got to learn the Mavs scheme quickly. I think that's another one of the things is that if he comes in and as a veteran who's seen a lot of defenses, he's played against a lot of defenses. I think if he comes in and learns the Mavs scheme quicker than, remember we were talking about Christian Wood's defense for like, it felt like months and months and months. Can he learn the system? Can he learn the scheme? If Klay comes in and learns it quickly and the learning curve is not as long for Klay, then that's hopefully something that helps him there. And then if his offense makes up for any type of downgrade, I think that's how he proves it to the Mavericks. And that's how I think Klay Thompson proves some of these things to the Mavs this season. Let us know in the comment section if you think that Klay is able to prove that, if he has the most to prove, or if it's somebody else that has the most to prove. We'll talk about who Joey thinks has the most to prove for the Mavericks. Daniel Gafford. What's he got to prove? since all of us have sort of written him off as the center coming off the bench. We'll talk about that and more coming up.
You don't believe you shouldn't be here.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is going to help you work through some of the things in your life that you need to talk through, that you need to think about, work through, answer questions in your mind, all that kind of stuff. Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose the curiosity and you think, all right, I know enough about myself. I've got myself figured out. I know how I work. I know how I operate. And then every once in a while, something surprises you. You go, wait, why did I respond that way? That's something you need to talk about in therapy. That's things that I've definitely talked about in therapy. If you're thinking about starting it, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule, and all that. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity about yourself and about the people around you and how you interact with the people around you at BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, being part of the show, part of the Raccoon Squad, listening every day. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out the show. For your second listen today, check out Locked On NBA. Jackson Gatlin has you covered on Mondays with 3 different interviews. I saw he had Rylan Stiles of Locked On Thunder on recently. If you want to hear about that team, he had Philip Rossman Reich of Locked On Magic. Talk to him. And then I'll be on Locked On NBA on Thursday. So go check out Locked On NBA. Wherever you're watching, listening to this, go listen to Locked On NBA. All right, Joey, we're here talking about players with the most to prove. I picked Klay Thompson as my player I think has the most to prove to the Mavericks themselves. What do you think Daniel Gafford has to prove to the Mavericks?
Yeah, I'm happy we're starting with Gafford here for me. For me, I feel like it's kind of a surprise that I'm going with him. I think most people, the guys we're going to talk about later, I think those are the guys who get the most attention for this kind of conversation. With Daniel Gafford, he was really a spark plug last year, as we know. The question is, he's 25 years old, and I'm kind of asking myself, who is Daniel Gafford in the NBA? Like, is he a star center? Is he a reserve big man? Is he just a normal starter? Like, who is he? And that's kind of what I was digging into with numbers. Last year, he averaged, 24.5 minutes per game between both teams he was on. With Dallas, that went down to 21.5. And he was averaging over 26 with Washington. Now, Derek Lively's the center of the future, and I think everybody in Dallas agrees with that. So what does that mean for Daniel Gafford? Like, is he going to be cool being the backup guy? Is he going to start at some point? So right now, Jason Kidd has questions to answer. Nico Harrison has questions to answer about that. It's never a bad thing for a team to have too much depth, especially at center. I think in the past, we've seen some Mav centers who maybe didn't fill that need. I think right now they have a great center duo. I'm just really curious to see what Gafford will do this season production-wise, and if he can maybe recapture a starting role. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to pick him as somebody to prove, because when you think about his game specifically, I start to think through the different facets of it, and I go, all right, well, I think I know what he is, right? I think, he's 26, or going to be 26 October 1st, and you just think, all right, I know who he is. He's a energy, get some rebounds, pick and roll, lob threat, all that kind of stuff. You know exactly what he's going to bring, but then he also now is in this position where he came to the Mavericks. Lively was the starter. Then Lively was injured. Gafford started when Lively came back. He, came off the bench. And now this season, all of us are penciling in Derek Lively as the starter. And so now, I think to me, what Gafford has to prove is he cool with being the backup? Is he cool with him and Lively being this two-headed monster combo? If his role gets diminished, I have him down for playing he played 21 and a half minutes last season for the Mavs in the regular season. That seems right to me. I'll have him playing 21 minutes. And if he's cool with that role, and if he's cool with that and coming off the bench in that way, then I don't know that he has anything to prove, but I think he does have to prove that first, that he's cool with that role. And then I think there are a couple other things he can do too, but it starts with, is he cool with that role? If Lively is going to take that step forward, if the Mavs are ready for him to take that step forward.
Yeah, I think for me, the reason I chose him was because he is younger. It's not like he's a 30-year-old veteran. Yeah. And I'm interested in his ceiling, his potential. And I know we know what he is as a player, but some guys do what he does at a higher level. Some guys do it at a lower level. So I just don't know how good he can be. Like, he could be a star catching lobs and rebounding and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that means he'll want to start. So I think we're agreeing on the same page. Like, will he be okay being that backup to Derek Lively? And if not, then I think for himself, he needs to prove to the Mavs or just to the NBA in general that he can be a starting center in the NBA and maybe earn a spot with Dallas or elsewhere.
You start to go through the starting centers though, and you start to really think, okay, who has a starting center that's worse than Daniel Gafford? And there's like not many. It's really solid for the Mavericks to have two of these guys. There's not many in the NBA that have two guys as good as both of these two, but who has a starting center that's worse, than Daniel Gafford?
Not many. Yeah.
And you start to go through and you're like, all right, so maybe maybe he'll look elsewhere. But he could go back to Washington and play that role again, but he's kind of already done that, right? So to me, if I'm him, I look at that kind of a situation like you're talking about where, all right, I want a bigger role. I want to prove myself. I want to, be the featured guy in the middle. I've done that. I did that for a couple years with the Bulls. I did that for a couple of years with the Wizards. I'm ready to win, and I'm ready. And I just got a taste of the NBA Finals. I think he'll have no problem taking this role. I think that the combination that him and Lively had last year, where one of them comes off the bench and they go to meet at the scorers table, and they each say to each other, "Go be a monster." Like that whole thing, that camaraderie between the two of them, I think is going to help this transition, if it is a transition or not, between who starts, who closes, who plays more, who doesn't, all that. But I think just both of those guys being who they are, and Lively will come into, foul trouble and all that. And so I think that Gafford will play enough. I don't think that this is going to be an issue. Like, I think we're going to go through this season and think, man, that was just really low maintenance that the Mavericks made that move. It could have been bad, but I think it ended up being really good. And Jason Kidd has navigated some of these things before, starting one guy, bringing another guy off the bench and all that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm not saying I don't think he can do it. I 100% think he can come off the bench. And, we both talked to him. Like, he seems like the kind of guy who wants to win more than anything. So not saying you can't do that. It'll just be an adjustment, though, because even the guys who prioritize winning the most, there still is a want sometimes to start. So I just hope he can adjust to that. I think he can. I think he will, but we'll see if he can. And that's what he needs to prove.
Playing for the Wizards will do that to you,
Hey, very true, very true.
Play with some of those point guards enough, and you're like, oh my gosh. You go from Russell Westbrook one season to Jordan Poole the next, and you go, oh my gosh, I'll do anything. I'll come off the bench. I'll play 20 minutes a game.
And now you get Luka and Kyrie. It's like the perfect.
I'll do whatever. It's fine, guys. I'm good. I think game wise for him, I wrote down a couple things I think he needs to prove. The defense to me is something that there's a couple areas on defense. I think defending the rim, I think he was solid at last season, but according to Synergy, 51% of the time he was defending the pick and roll ball handler. He switched a lot with the Mavericks. Like, he was switching out to defend some of those ball handlers, and he was average at that, which I think is actually better than I would have thought he would have rated at defending, like ball handlers in a pick and roll. But it's the foot speed to me. If he can get a little bit quicker, a little more agile, defend some of those, stay in front of some of those ball handlers a little bit better, I think that'll go a long way for the Mavericks. And so if I were to pick one like tangible skill he needs to get better at, it'd be that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think rebounding too, honestly. With the Mavs last year, he averaged just under 7. He had 8 in Washington, which is good. And obviously that comes down to minutes too. Like, he's not playing 30 minutes. So his rebounding, it's not just about rebounding numbers, more about rebounding efficiency. But if he can just get a little more consistent rebounding, which he's going to, I think he'll be more comfortable. But yeah, I agree with you. I think defense is the big thing, guarding the primary ball handler. Even if they get by him, like, coming back to blocking from behind is huge. And that's something he can do really well.
Yeah, and then I don't know how the rotations are going to play out, but I think him getting connected with Dinwiddie and having some kind of synergy and chemistry there, I think could go a really long way too, especially in the games when Luka or Kyrie miss time. I think if he gets some synergy with Spencer Dinwiddie, that can go a long way too, and so I think he can prove that. Coming up, Jaden Hardy has to prove some stuff to the Dallas Mavericks and I think to the NBA as well. What should the Mavs' long-term plan be for Jaden Hardy? We'll talk about all that and more coming up.
You don't believe you shouldn't be here.
Today's episode of Locked On Dallas Mavericks is brought to you by Game Time. The Game Time app is awesome. I use it all the time. I've been to so many different games recently. I was talking to Joey at Wings games the other day. I use the Game Time app. They have all kinds of great stuff there. And I use the Game Time app to go to an SMU game recently, football. I'm going to the Rangers game this week, and we're using Game Time, all kinds of stuff. They also have Labor Day deal right now. They also have a Labor Day deal for Dodgers at Diamondbacks if you're in the Arizona area. So check out that, see what they have available there for you. Game Time has all kinds of different features too that are awesome. They have seat views. Not a lot of apps have seat views anymore. They've started to just bail on that, but you want to see where your view is going to be. So check that out. They also have the all-in pricing. You just turn on all-in and it'll show you all the fees and everything up front so that you're not surprised at the checkout. I love that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time.
My first shot, my first make.
Thanks everyone for hanging out with us, Locked On Mavs, being part of this show. That Luka drop that I just played, that came up on my TikTok for you feed today, where it was a trick shot where Luka he's basically like behind the basket but out of bounds, and he throws that. He goes, my
first shot, my first make.
It was a trick shot. Of course, it was a trick shot from Luka. But it's funny. Every once in a while, I'll get somebody to be like, "Who is that? Who says that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's Luka." It doesn't sound like him at first, but
Yep, exactly.
It's Luka in rare form to do his voice like this.
My first shot, my first make.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one. Maybe I'm trying to think if I heard it at all this past year. Maybe once. I don't know.
Another player. We're picking players who have the most to prove. We talked about Klay Thompson, what he has to prove, what Daniel Gafford has to prove. Jaden Hardy. What should the Mavs' long-term plan be for Jaden Hardy? What does he still have to prove to the Mavericks, Joey?
Yeah, for me, this was kind of the obvious one. I was thinking about him or Prosper, but I went with Hardy. And for me, it's like Jaden Hardy has all this potential. I think he has a high ceiling. It comes down to playing time. You know, he does need the opportunity. He averaged 13 and a half minutes last year. You know, he did well. He showed really like bursts of scoring potential. I think he can be a really good scorer. For me, I did want to narrow it down. It's one thing to just talk about a player, but there's one thing specifically I want to see from him, and that's just efficiency in terms of scoring. You know, he shot 36.2% from beyond the arc, which is pretty good. But he shot 40.7% from the field, and in his rookie year, he shot just under 44%. I do want to see if he can become somebody who's a little more efficient as a scorer. And I do want to recognize that it is difficult when you're playing sporadically to find efficiency.
Yeah.
Because you get that, regular playing time, you can kind of find your rhythm. So I don't really hold that against him, but I am interested to see if J Kidd gives him more minutes this year as Hardy continues to emerge. And if so, can he become a reliable and efficient scorer?
Yeah, I think to break it down a little further for him, it's the decision making, which has always kind of been his thing. It's such a hard thing to do for a guard, especially when you have the talents that Hardy does. You can get to the rim, you can pull up and take any shot you want all over the floor. He can do those things, but when should you do those things? When should you make the decision to drive? When should you make the decision to pull up and take a jumper? But with him, we saw him, his role really got diminished during the regular season. His minutes dropped from his rookie year to his second year. But then, and I thought, okay, well, kid hasn't really believed in him, so now his role is going to go down. Maybe he'll take a step forward next year. They go into the playoffs, and I can remember this. I've said this a couple times on this show, but I remember a listener coming up to me at one of the last Mavs games of the regular season. We're in the hallway in the AAC, and he goes, "What kind of role could Hardy have in the playoffs?" And I was like, none. Like there's just I can't see a scenario where he finds a role. Dante Exum had been good. Luka and Kyrie are going to play a ton of minutes. Josh Green, they'll play Tim Hardaway, all that stuff. And I was trying to think of a role that he could have in the playoffs, and I couldn't really think of one. Well, now come, the OKC series, he plays the last couple of games, and in the Timberwolves series, the Western Conference Finals, he carves out this role where all of a sudden he's starting to play some real rotation minutes. Played 10 minutes a game. That's pretty big for a guy that I didn't think had a role at all. So he plays 10 minutes a game there. Then he comes in and plays 10 minutes in the first game of the finals. He plays 13 minutes in game 4, and now all of a sudden I go, okay, well maybe there's something there, because he's a guy that will rise to the moment and will step up when the Mavs really need somebody to do a little here and there. But now you bring in Dinwiddie, you bring in Klay Thompson. Maybe that role's diminished a little bit more. So when you said Jaden Hardy to me, the thing that I came up with is he has to prove that his upside is still within reach. Now, how does he prove that his upside is still within reach this season?
Well, that's the thing. I think it comes down to that efficiency, like I went back to. I agree with you, decision-making, and that can be whether to pass or shoot. It can be which shots to take. There's so many different things on a basketball floor that people don't realize you have to think about. It's not just dribbling a ball and shooting. Like, you have so many decisions to make, especially in the NBA where the game is so fast. So for me, if he can just come out and be efficient, help out on the defensive end of the floor. But again, going back to like the Klay Thompson conversation, it's not that I don't care how well he plays defense. You got to play some D, but for Hardy, it comes down to offense. And do you have that offensive ceiling like you mentioned? And I personally still believe he does. And I've talked to a lot of Mavs media guys, and they all seem to agree. Like, I think a lot of people still believe in Hardy. I think the question comes down, does Jason Kidd believe in Hardy? And you can even make the argument that's what Jay Kidd needs to prove, is his belief in Hardy. Because if Hardy's going to just be able to display that potential like we keep talking about, it comes down to playing time and getting minutes.
Yeah, because I don't think they're going to throw him back to the Legends, right? I think he's done that. He didn't go back at all anytime last season.
I don't think so.
He played a bunch his rookie year, so I don't think they're going to do that. So now it's all right. Now you got to show that you can play in the big show. With Hardy, I think, the decision making has got to be a lot better. I think that he defensively, I thought that he took a little step forward last season. I think for all the talk about his offense, I thought I saw him play with more intention on defense. I thought him play with more intensity, where he's in his stance. He's trying to stay in front of guys. I think if athletically he can stay in front of guys if he really wants to, and really like digs down deep and finds a way to do it. He's got to outplay Exum, right? And maybe like prove his worth in competition with Dinwiddie to get those minutes. And I think that's something that's going to be a little difficult for him to try and prove. But he's there. He's got all the skills there. He's got the opportunity to prove it in training camp and to show that he can take that step forward. But he's really got to be better with decision making and all that.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about him too is, I think ceiling wise, his ceiling is higher than Exum and Dinwiddie. Those guys are going to get the opportunity. But if Hardy can go in, not just during games, but in practice, and show J Kidd, show the coaching staff, like, hey, I want this really bad. I'm doing everything I can to improve, which I'm sure he is already. If he just continues to display that progression, that's when you start getting more minutes. Then you can prove yourself on the floor. It all adds up, and then you start breaking out and making a name for yourself.
Yeah, I'm curious about his, like, one of the things that we need to see from him is his his catch and shoot. Like his unguarded catch and shoot, he was just good last season on Synergy, which is not super great. He shot 40% on unguarded catch and shoot shots. That's something that he's just got to get better at. Maybe that's just a math game and a numbers game. But the Mavs don't have this lack of playmakers problem anymore like they did last year, where you go, oh man, we're just so desperate. We've got to throw somebody out there. If Dinwiddie was on the team, I think he plays all the minutes that Hardy played in the playoffs. Like, I don't think that. Yeah. And so now you're talking about he's got to beat more guys out for this role and for those minutes this season. I do want to talk about Maxi. I do want to talk about Maxi Kleber. I think that he has some stuff to prove for the Dallas Mavericks. I think he's got to prove that the Mavs can still go to the Maxi at the 5 lineups, because those lineups are still invaluable. To play Lively and to play Gafford and playing them 48 minutes is great, but to be able to change it up, go to Maxi at the 5. I just want to remind everybody, in the regular season, the Mavs went to this Maxi at the 5 lineup for 1,154 possessions. That's a pretty good sample size. And they were a plus 9.5 net rating. They were outscoring opponents by almost 10 points per 100 possessions. That is very good. Those Maxi at the 5 lineups were good in the regular season. In the playoffs, they only did it for 159 possessions. That's about a game and a half, which is actually a decent sample size in the playoffs. They outscored opponents by 17.5 points per 100 possession. These Maxi at the 5 lineups are still good, but to me, he's got to prove that they can still go to those lineups with his 3-point shooting confidence. Every time he gets hurt, he comes back and doesn't take threes. You just look at his per 36, the amount of threes that he takes per 36 minutes. If you just kind of do the math on that. In 2022, he took 6.3 threes per 36 minutes. In 2023, he took 44.3 threes per 36 minutes. And then last season, he took 3.8. So it just keeps going down from 6, 4, 3. He just keeps taking less and less threes because he seems less confident in it. Is there anything that you think Maxi needs to prove to the Mavericks to prove that he can still go out there and play and they can still go to those lineups?
Yeah, the easy answer, I think, is, 3-point shooting. But I do think it's defense too. Just proving that he doesn't need to be an elite defender, but just be somebody who can make an impact, stay in front of your man, help on ball handlers, that kind of thing. Kind of like we talked about with Gafford, being able to help out on ball handlers if necessary. But yeah, it really is 3-point shooting. And I know we've talked a lot about offense on this podcast, but it's kind of just the truth. And if Maxi can hit from 3, that's huge. And that's what they really need. And the defense, it's going to help too. But I just go back to his shooting and his confidence. Like you said, if he can just take shots, even if he's not making them at first, but showing that willingness to take shots, that'll be huge.
Yeah, the 3-point shot is what's going to get him to prove that he should play those minutes because the defense was good last year. I mean, I'll stand by that. There were times at the end of the regular season I go, man, Maxi is still probably one of the best defenders on this roster. You go look here. I just pulled up his synergy numbers. Defending pick and roll ball handlers last season, 43% of the time in the regular season, he rated it excellent. The highest you can get defending ball handlers in the pick and roll. He was still good last season defensively. He was excellent defending spot up shots, and that's what he did 28% of the time last season. So Maxi was still good defensively. It's the offense, and if he's not willing to take those threes, then he's not spacing the floor as much as the Mavericks need him to for those lineups to be as effective. So I think Maxi still has a couple of things to prove. He's also got to stay healthy. Last season, he played 23 games between 20 and 29 minutes. He played 15 games between 10 and 19 minutes, and I think he'll venture more towards the 10 to 19 minute games. I think his minutes will go down this season, I think. And I think he'll play less, which I think should help some of that injury stuff for him. But we'll see. We'll see what he has to prove. Joey, where can everybody read, follow you, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on Clutch Points, Joey Mistretta. Find my author profile that way. On Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, it's Joey Mistretta _. Instagram, it's Joey _Mistretta 24. I post, a bunch of content stuff, obviously articles. On Twitter, I'm a reporter, obviously, so injury updates, any news, stuff like that. And yeah, that's where I'm most active, Instagram, Twitter for sure.
Go check out Joey's stuff. Joey, thanks for hanging out with us on the show. We will be back tomorrow. Slightly and I will be going through the Dallas Mavericks, talking about something to do with this team. That's what we do every day. We're here. Guys, thanks for listening to Locked On Mavs.
Peace out.
Boom.